Painted black. That was Donald Trump's order to Kristi Noem, the Homeland Secretary of Homeland Security. That's right. Painted black. Go down to the southern border, grab a paintbrush, and paint that wall black. Why? Well, several reasons.
Thank Kristi for another reason. I said to her 2 weeks ago, I said, Kristi, do me a favor. I built hundreds of miles of wall. I built the same wall that the Border Patrol asked me to build. It wasn't my first choice. I wanted to do concrete plank and everything nice, but you wouldn't have been able to see through it. So I had Border Patrol in, and they tested everything else. And we gave them steel wall, high-grade steel, very hard to cut. Then we gave inside that is 9,000-pound concrete, which is a very tough concrete. Inside that is rebar, a big, fat piece of rebar. So you have all different materials that are very hard to cut, and you need different instruments to cut each one. And I said, Kristi, we got to get a coat of paint on it. And I didn't know she was listening, but I said, we got to get a coat of paint, and it should be black, because black makes the steel very hot. It's untouchable. You could fry an egg on it. And if you got a good black, flat paint, it would look beautiful. It will preserve it from rust. And that was it. And I gave it to her along with 30 other things, and she's done such a good job on the border with Tom Homan and the group. Tom Homan's a fantastic guy, what the job he does and the way they work together. So I turned on last night and I see Kristi's painting the wall. And it looked beautiful, by the way, when that paint went over there.
And it's hot.
It's hot.
Yes.
It's hot. If it's white, it's not hot. If it's black, it's going to be very hard to climb that sucker. It's not going to be easy. But it's black and a high quality black. You know, it really looked good.
Yeah, we got.
Is that going to be a 2-coat job or a 1-coat?
No, just 1 coat.
1 coat.
We used the paint you told me to buy.
Yep. The 2-coat will take place in 3 years from now. Right? We'll do the 2nd coat. But it looks beautiful. But thank you very much. I didn't know you were listening to that, because we talked about 7 different subjects, and all of a sudden I see her out there painting with a lot of painters and everything else. But it was a beautiful thing to say.
Yeah.
There's multiple fascinating things about this. First of all, President Donald Trump, again, a construction worker by trade. I mean, this is a guy who's built buildings in every major city on several different continents. He owns golf clubs and whatnot. And he knows about rebar, and he knows about concrete, and he knows about paint. And he told Kristi Noem, here's the paint you're going to buy. Not just painted black, but here's the paint. You know, go to Home Depot, not Lowe's because they're woke. Go to Home Depot, buy 255,000 gallons of this exterior black paint. It's going to be matte. It's going to be hot. And nobody's going to be able to climb it. And Kristi Noem said, okay. And she got out there herself with a roller and started painting. But it just goes to show once again how hands-on this president is and how he is involved in every single aspect of what's going on. For example, the continued negotiations with Ukraine. And one of the reporters, which, by the way, he was in the Oval Office with the head of FIFA for the World Cup. He got the first ticket to the World Cup championship. He got the trophy that he got to hold, and they were announcing that tickets are going on sale and that the draw will be at the Kennedy Center, which is fantastic. And President Donald Trump then took questions from the media, one of whom asked about the war in Ukraine and the bombing of an American factory and said, are you happy about that? Which is a ridiculous question. And Donald Trump said, no, I'm not.
I told him I'm not happy about it. And I'm not happy about anything having to do with that war. I said I settled 7 wars, and actually, if you think about pre-wars, add 3 more, so it would be 10. I thought this would be in the middle of the pack in terms of difficulty. No, I'm not happy about anything about that war. Nothing. Not happy at all. We'll see what happens. I think over the next 2 weeks, we're going to find out which way it's going to go. And I better be very happy.
So President Donald Trump, again, giving the timeline of 2 weeks, saying, look, we're going to find out what happens. Over the next 2 weeks, something's going to happen. We're going to find out what goes on with Russia and Ukraine, and I better be happy, because right now I am not. And if Donald Trump's not happy, well, you know, nobody's really happy. J.D. Vance went out on the Sunday shows to also talk about Russia and Ukraine and a myriad of other topics. And he put Kristen Welker straight on a couple of the Kristen Welker. Some of these women, or really any of the people that they find to host these Sunday shows, it's really interesting. They ought to find somebody who's much more qualified, knowledgeable, and intelligent than they do, especially when they put them up against somebody like J.D. Vance, who is qualified, knowledgeable, and intelligent, and just kind of browbeats them. I unwittingly browbeats them in these interviews. But she asked again about boots on the ground for like the 9 bajillionth time. And VP Vance set her straight on that.
For Americans who are watching, can you guarantee no U.S. boots on the ground as a part of these security guarantees?
The president's very clear. There are not going to be boots on the ground in Ukraine, but we are going to continue to play an active role in trying to ensure that the Ukrainians have the security guarantees, the confidence they need to stop the war on their end. And the Russians feel like they can bring the war to a conclusion on their end. It's complicated, Kristen, but we're going to keep on trying to play these parties. We're going to keep on trying to convince these parties to talk to each other and continue to play the game of diplomacy, because that's the only way to get this thing wrapped up.
Yeah, and of course, Kristen Welker doesn't understand diplomacy, so J.D. Vance is there to help explain it to her.
I didn't say they conceded on everything, but what they have conceded is the recognition that Ukraine will have territorial integrity after the war. They've recognized that they're not going to be able to install a puppet regime in Kiev. That was, of course, a major demand at the beginning. And importantly, they've acknowledged that there is going to be some security guarantee to the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Again, have they made every concession? Of course they haven't. Should they have started the war? Of course they haven't. But we're making progress, Kristen. And what I admire about the president in this moment is he's not asking 3.5 years ago. He's not trying to focus on every nitpicky detail of how this thing started 3.5 years ago. He's trying to focus on the nitpicky details of now, of what do the parties disagree on, what do they agree on, and how do you build a foundation from one side of that ledger to the other so that you can stop the killing.
And if you don't believe that Donald Trump is focused on the nitpicky details, I would just point you to the clip we played earlier about him telling Kristi Noem which type of black paint to buy for the wall. Russia is conceding some things. They are making moves in the right direction. They do realize that Ukraine will have sovereignty, but we're not at a point yet where they're meeting in private, the two of them, and coming to any kind of agreement about the end of the war. But Kristen Welker continues to push J.D. Vance on some of the things that they could be doing, like sanctions. And J.D. Vance says, look, sanctions are not going to lead to a ceasefire.
Now, you said sanctions were not going to lead to a ceasefire. I think that's obviously correct. If you look at the way the Russians have conducted themselves, they don't want a ceasefire. They don't want a ceasefire for complicated reasons. We, of course, have pushed for a ceasefire. But again, we don't control what Russia does. If we did, the war would have been over 7 months ago. What we do believe, though, is that we continue to have a lot of cards. The President of the United States has a lot of cards left to play to apply pressure to try to bring this conflict to a close. And that's what we're going to do.
And that is something that Donald Trump has been intent on doing from the get-go. Whatever he can, whether it's sanctions, which, by the way, exist on Russia. And that's something people don't understand. They think that I hear all the reporting all the time that Donald Trump left Alaska and gave Vladimir Putin everything he wanted. Vladimir Putin walked away happy as a clam. He got to meet with President Donald Trump. He got to come to the United States. He got the red carpet, and he doesn't have any sanction on his country, which is just not true. Sanctions have existed on Russia for years.
Where exactly is the pressure on Russia to do anything if you're not right now imposing new sanctions? How do you get them to a place of getting to the table with Zelensky and stopping to drop bombs?
But Kristen, I think that question betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of where we are. The president has applied aggressive economic leverage, for example, the secondary tariffs on India, to try to make it harder for the Russians to get rich from their oil economy. He's tried to make it clear that Russia can be re-invited into the world economy if they stop the killing, but they're going to continue to be isolated if they don't stop the killing. The president has applied more economic pressure to the Russians to stop this war than Biden did in 3 years. So the idea that we're not doing anything, we're already doing things right now. And this is how negotiation works. You do something, you talk to the parties, you try to see if there's a meeting of minds. Again, we believe we've already seen some significant concessions from both sides just in the last few weeks. We're going to eventually be successful, or we'll hit a brick wall. And if we hit a brick wall, then we're going to continue this process of negotiation, of applying leverage. This is the energetic diplomacy that's going to bring this war to a close.
I love my favorite part of that whole clip is when he says this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how things work, which is a great way to sum up A great way to sum up Meet the Press. They also talked about some other things. One of them was the raid on John Bolton's house by the FBI and the search and seizure of certain documents so they could investigate or continue an investigation that was opened up by the Biden administration into whether or not John Bolton was misusing and mishandling top secret documents. And Kristen Welker labeled it as retribution, which J.D. Vance was quick to argue.
You know, a lot of people have already looked at this and said this looks a lot like retribution. Is this retribution?
Well, who has said it looks a lot like retribution, Kristen? A lot of people who tried to throw Donald Trump in prison for completely fake charges that were later thrown out by multiple different courts. I suspect that if the media and the American people let this case actually unfold, if they let the investigation unfold as it's currently doing, they're going to find out that what we're doing is being very deliberate and being very driven by the national interest and by the law here. And that's as it should be.
And those are two things that the Biden administration was never really interested in, the national interest and the law. In fact, they didn't like either of those things. They tried to go against the national interest of the United States of America and the law, and they were quite successful, unfortunately. But we have a brand new president, and this brand new president is going to make sure that the law is upheld. If the law was broken by anyone in the Biden administration, he's going to uphold it. If the law was broken by anyone who is a Republican, he's going to uphold it. And that includes former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who also appeared on the Sunday shows. President Donald Trump watched him and said, "I just watched sloppy Chris Christie be interviewed on a ratings challenged news show," news in quotation marks, "this week with George Slopadopoulos on ABC Fake News. By the way, what the hell happened to Jonathan Karl's hair? He looks absolutely terrible." I love when Donald Trump comments on other people's hair. That just makes my day. It's amazing what bad ratings on a failed television show that was forced to pay me $16 million can do to one's appearance. Can anyone believe anything that sloppy Chris says? Do you remember the way he lied about the dangerous and deadly closure of the George Washington Bridge in order to stay out of prison? At the same time, sacrificing people who worked for him, including a young mother who spent years trying to fight off the vicious charges against her. Chris refused to take responsibility for these criminal acts. For the sake of justice, perhaps we should start looking at that very serious situation again. No one is above the law. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Man, clear out the biggest prison cell you've got, because President Donald Trump is going after Chris Christie. We'll have that clip, by the way, of Chris Christie and Jonathan Karl and his horrible hair coming up later on Mark Kaye Saves the Republic. They also asked about gerrymandering because on Saturday, the Texas Republican Senate and Congress passed their new redistricting laws, and their new districts are going to be redrawn before the 2026 election, which means there's going to be a lot of representatives who have just been redistricted out of a job. Jasmine Crockett, that could be a Freudian slip. Jasmine Crockett. There you go. Comes to mind. Al Green, among some others. But the question about gerrymandering was an interesting one since, as J.D. Vance told Kristen Welker once again, it's typically the Democrats who have favored gerrymandering.
You have to ask yourself, why have Democrats gerrymandered their states aggressively over the past 10 to 20 years? If you look, for example, at the popular vote in a lot of these states, and Massachusetts, where 32% of the residents of Massachusetts voted for Republicans, 0 Republican federal representatives. So we're not trying to all we're doing, frankly, is trying to make the situation a little bit more fair on a national scale. The Democrats have gerrymandered their states really aggressively. We think there are opportunities to push back against that, and that's really all we're doing.
And also the census helps with that because, the census has been skewed by illegal immigration, something, again, that J.D. Vance had to explain to Kristen Welker.
We had way fewer House seats than we should have. 1, if the Democrats hadn't aggressively gerrymandered, and 2, if illegal aliens weren't counted in the census for purposes of apportioning congressional seats. The best estimates I've seen is that in California, for example, has 5 additional congressional seats than it should have because they count illegal aliens for the purpose of apportioning representatives. Meanwhile, Ohio, my home state, lost a representative. We're literally losing representatives for American citizens in order to give congressional representation to illegal aliens. Republicans are trying to balance out the scales a little bit for basic fairness and for the integrity of our democracy, which the president cares about as much as anybody in the country.
Yeah, it seemed pretty clear cut to me. She still didn't get it, though.
Of course, people who are here and who are not documented are not eligible to vote. But
they're not eligible to vote, but they do go in the congressional apportionment. That's why California has so many more seats, is because they count illegal aliens. So even though they don't vote, well, some of them actually do vote, but hopefully most of them don't. They end up getting congressional representation that ought by right go to American citizens.
I know.
The more she asks questions, the more JD Vance gets to make his point. So I think that he should go on these. I think JD Vance should just have a Sunday show. I think that would be the best thing. At this point forward, just gives JD Vance his own hour on NBC or CBS or one of those networks, maybe Fox News, and he could just go out there and he could set the record straight every single weekend so that we don't have to worry about these fake news reporters, reporting on fake news. Listen, we've got a lot more we've got to cover. A lot more happened this weekend, and Donald Trump is back at it today. He's hosting the South Korean president in the Oval Office, which means there will be a press conference, and we will cover it on our second daily podcast, Mark Kaye Saves the Republic. If you don't yet listen or subscribe to Mark Kaye Saves the Republic, it's really easy to do. Go to markkaye.com, MarkKaye.com. Click the big red button, download, subscribe, listen, and enjoy.